what we're going to look at now is the 2010 election. My take on the 2010 election. This sort of presentation was published in an academic journal called the Journal of Political Marketing, which is an American journal. And this is a sort of dumbed down version of that. Not that you were dumb, but you know, really, you would not want to read or listen to the original paper. And hopefully it will, you know, hopefully more entertaining, and it might illustrate some of the problems we have in modern politics, and maybe indicate what's going to happen for the next 4 interminable months before we decide who's going to not be the next governing party, followed by another few weeks in which UKIP and the Conservatives finally get into bed together, or whatever, or maybe Labour and SNP, you know, which is the right's nightmare, the Telegraph's nightmare, Salmon and Miliband. But anyway, okay, it's nearly 60 years ago that the TV age started in terms of politics, and of course it started in America. Eisenhower, no limitations there on electoral spending. They can buy whatever ads they want, and they can say almost whatever they want. So almost right from the start, American campaigning had a slightly negative edge. We now reach the stage where we are in the era of personality politics, whether we like it or not. If you've seen the Greek election result, you will see the young, charismatic Greek leader. He's made for TV. He's made for the 21st century. And if you see the people he was opposing, you understand why he won, despite the fact that in a deeply conservative country, his message was sort of rather radical. But here we are. This is the modern politician. This is Obama, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, if you remember. Who still hasn't shut down Guantanamo Bay, but that's another issue. Here he is, by the way. This is an advert used without Obama's permission. They took it down in Times Square above Red Lobster. Weatherproof, a leader in style. This is just after he got elected. But the thing about it is that there's nothing incongruous about it. He doesn't look out of place. Imagine Harold Macmillan up there, you know, or John Major, or anyone like that, or even Thatcher. It just wouldn't work. We are in a new era, and that new era now, of course, is, and this is where that idiot, if you like, put forward a group of names. You remember that that particular interview? I won't bore you with it, but anyway, this is where they've got to be, especially ever since Blair, really. Although Thatcher started it, by the way, the Jimmy Young show, going on to modern, popular mass media and attempting to sell herself. And all of this, in fact, is a direct result of a new phenomenon, if you like, in politics, in Britain in particular, political marketing. There's now a belief, this is indicative of the belief, that you can sell politicians the same way you can sell beans. What this overlooks, of course, in other words, that you can sell leaders, you can sell parties, you can sell policies in the same way as you can sell commercial products. The thing is, of course, is the Telegraph, the Mail, the Mirror, whatever, ITV, Sky, whatever, they don't care about selling Heinz beans. They've got no objections to it whatsoever. It doesn't matter whether Heinz beans sell more than Cross and Blackwell. It really doesn't matter to them. They'll still make their money from the adverts. The thing is, the media are not, as you know, I'm speaking to an audience that I'm sure knows this, is not unbiased. The BBC, for example, is not an unbiased institution, no matter what its charter may say. It isn't. It has a series of objectives and beliefs. Some of them we were talking about earlier on. Multiculturalism may well have contributed to some of the problems we have in society now. Benevolently meant, maybe, but wrong. And that, if you like, colours the way they present the news. And of course, compared to the, by the way, I'm a fan of the BBC. I don't want to slag off the BBC, because without it, God knows what sort of media we'd have. But compared to the newspapers, the BBC is positively, you know, is like Justice, completely blind and oblivious to anything other than the truth, so to speak. When we look at the British feral media, as Tony Blair describing the media as feral, of course, and there was another irony of modern politics. In 1992, the Conservatives were widely expected to lose. They were going to lose. Kinnock was going to win. That was the received wisdom. I heard some of you say that you were Labour Party members. You may remember Sheffield, all right, which is commonly held, by many people anyway, to have lost Labour that election, that era of triumphalism. The Sun, of course, printed a very famous front page. If Kinnock wins today, someone please turn out the lights. And predicted, of course, that this is what page 3 would look like under Kinnock and under Labour. You know? What it looks like now, of course, is a matter of some conjecture again. And of course, when they didn't happen, the Sun claimed that it's the Sun what won it. And ever since then, the media, the press in particular, seen themselves as kingmakers. The success of Blair in 1997 in particular, it was like, we made Blair. Absolute rubbish, of course. The Sun backed Blair, do you remember? The Express backed Blair. A lot of papers who would not normally gone anywhere near Labour backed Blair. The reason they backed Blair was because, one, he wasn't a danger to the neo-Thatcherite consensus, and two, he was going to win. Murdoch backs winners. And of course, there were a lot of policy concessions as well, which we'll go into. Okay, let's go back in time just slightly. I could go back way back to 1945 when political adverts really said something. If any of you have ever seen the brilliant Labour Party advertisements with the chains being crashed in 1945 and arguing that, you know, what are Labour for? Labour are for public ownership of the means of production. Party political posters actually said something in those days. And even as late as 1978, probably, and this, by the way, is widely assumed to be the start of modern British campaigning. Saatchi and Saatchi, Tim Bell, remodel Thatcher, make her into the new model. I know, by the way, I know I'm not telling you anything you don't know here, but hopefully it will get more interesting. Labour isn't working. Britain's better off with Conservatives. Absolutely brilliant message, because it works on so many levels. Labour, the party, isn't working. Labour also means Britain isn't working. People aren't working. And the strength of that particular poster, in 1978, the Winter of Discontent, etc., you all remember, well, yeah, nearly everybody remembers it here anyway, it means that that message is still commonly reproduced, for example, and here we have the fat cats queuing up to be given their money by Gordon Brown after the collapse of the banks for all Bank of Scotland, and capitalism isn't working. Now, this image has been incredibly powerful. And traditionally, posters have had a huge impact. In 2010, they had very little impact because in most cases, the messages that the parties put out, I'm going to look at some of those in a minute, were incredibly banal. There was not one single message which seriously, from the three main parties, by the way, I'm accepting the Greens here, from the three main parties which said anything about what they were really going to do. This is where, this was a huge mistake by Labour. This is a poster they produced. They must have thought this was a great idea. Don't let him take Britain back to the 1980s. Hang on a minute. The people who vote in general elections largely are the 35 to 55-year-olds. The same people who remember the 80s with huge affection, whether we like Thatcher or not. They remember it. They were young. They danced the Spandau Ballet, etc. And on there, what do they dress Cameron up as? The coolest man on television at the time. From Ashes to Ashes at the time. Life on Mars, Ashes to Ashes. They put him there in his crocodile skin boots and they perch him on one of the greatest production cars of all time, an Audi the Audi Quattro, the first four-wheel drive production car. Hang on a minute, you know, hang on a minute, this geek, this man who cartoonists draw with a condom on his head to indicate his lack of features is suddenly cool. And the Conservatives jumped on this and actually used it. Vote for change, vote Conservative. Idea kindly donated by the Labour Party. But it's one of the few times that there was any sort of verve and excitement in the campaign. Mostly the posters, of course, were satirised. We're going to see a few in a minute. In fact, here are the messages. These are the main messages of the three political parties. Can you imagine anything more banal and useless and stupid and insulting the public's intelligence? A future fair for all. Oh, what use is a slogan if you can't argue the opposite? When in 1945 Labour is saying, you know, public ownership against private monopoly. There's a direct opposition there in that message. A future unfair for all. Who's going to say that? Nobody. Vote for change. Vote for the same old rubbish. And of course, the Liberal Democrats seize on it and pick both of them. Building a fairer Britain and change that works for you. Standard Liberal Democrat category. In fact, satirising his great cartoon, I think it's in the Times, will be whatever you want us to be. And for those of us who are cynical and critical about mainstream politics, it may well be that what's happened since 2010 is an indication that's exactly what the Liberal Democrats were prepared to do. So all these anodyne slogans, here the Conservative one, they tried all of these, by the way. None of them worked. Vote blue, go green. Oh yeah, you know, we'll believe that. We're all in this together. Yes, of course we are. David Cameron and your Oldetonian chums. By the way, I'm playing a bit of devil's advocate here. I might not necessarily believe everything I'm saying here. The big society. Whatever happened to the big society? They even came up with the slogan that they were speaking on behalf of the great ignored. All of these things, for example, just led to the sort of usual jokes that, in fact, the great ignored were them, as the public moves out. Adams in the Telegraph. In fact, what this cartoon, funny though it is, failed to understand was that this really was the first election in which television really made an impact on what happened, and in which, for the first time, the newspapers lost their power. And they have lost that power, and they will not get it back for all sorts of reasons. Whether the ridiculous debates go ahead, as they're talking, 7 parties in a debate, what a waste of time. What are you going to get? Absolutely nothing. The TV debates actually challenged the nature of democracy. It's only, in my lifetime, 1960, that the very first TV debate happened, even in the States. The common myth, if you like, is that Kennedy won the election on TV because he looked better than Nixon. Whether that's true or not, there's a lot of research which demonstrates that people who only heard the debates on radio thought Nixon had won the debate. And amazingly, I don't know if you know this, political scientists repeated this particular debate, this particular experiment, questioning people who heard the debates on radio, people who'd seen the debates on TV, and amazingly, people who listened to it only on radio, the majority of people thought that Gordon Brown had won the debates. And of course, you know, whatever else Brown is, there was a real intellect with Brown. The problem is that the image, it's the television age, mate. You can't sell Gordon Brown. That strange Richter smile that came up suddenly, oh, I've got a smile, and I can't even do it. I don't know if anybody would like to try to do the Gordon Brown smile. It's not easy, is it? But anyway, what happened, of course, was that they made a number of mistakes, the main political parties. One, why did they allow Clay to go in the middle? I played in lots of pop groups, and I tell you this now, if there's 3 of you on the front, you're the one. The argument about who's going to be in the middle, because that's where the spotlight is on. He's also, by the way, amazingly, the only candidate who took professional advice. The rest of them listened to their spin doctors. He went, this is from PR Weekly, he went to Electric Airwaves, and their first piece of advice, in it, as it says there, look straight into the camera. If you remember those debates, both Brown and Cameron addressed the hall, the audience. Hey, waste of time. You're not talking to them. They're political junkies and groupies anyway. You're talking to the 9 million people who watched the first debate. You've got to look into their eyes. And that's what the 2 million people didn't do. So, Clay's performance, if you like, was what won him those debates. It also led to some, by the way, there was also, if you remember, instant viewers polls. Do you remember those? The papers were suddenly the real media age, the real internet age has started, because by the time the papers appeared the next morning telling you that Cameron had won, you know, we already knew that that's not what the public thought. Whose poll is this? Oh, this is the Sun's poll. Do we trust it? No, we don't. We already knew that the public thought that actually that Clegg had won the debates. So immediately, what you've got is yet again some questioning. Do you remember the phrase, you can't believe what you read in the papers? It goes back to the First World War. when for the first time the masses could actually see the lies that were being told in the newspapers, because they were being delivered to the front line, an unchanging front line. And the soldiers would read this and think, hang on a minute, that's not the truth, that's not what's happening. Well, now the public can say, hang on a minute, we saw those debates. We heard, if you remember, after the debates, there was a half an hour lull usually while they were waiting for the viewers' post to come in. And in that time, the spin doctors would not even talk. No, we're not talking yet. They would wait until that post came in, and then they'd start going mad. Television was driving this debate in a way that they'd never done before. And what happened after this was some of the most distasteful attacks on the politician that I've ever seen. Plaguing Nazi slur on Britain. This is not what a 10-year-old article in The Guardian, which he said that the United Kingdom was suffering from, 10 years ago he argued it, the United Kingdom was suffering from its still obsession with the Second World War. Who could deny it? We're still obsessed with the bloody Second World War now. We're still obsessed with it as a nation for some strange reason, despite the fact that most people who fought in there are dead or dying. And this, of course, this is from the Mail on Sunday. His wife is Spanish, his mother Dutch, his father half Russian, and his spin doctor German. Is there anything British about Mick? The response, I know male journalists who were pretty hard-hearted, who were incredibly embarrassed by this. The way in which the right-wing press suddenly started producing this sort of stuff. And it damaged, as some people argue, as I'll point out in a minute, the reputation of British newspapers. The new feature, and also led to the one thing that was genuinely new about 2010, which was the online spoofs of almost everything. Within minutes, seconds sometimes, of something appearing, somebody was spoofing it online. And political parties were incredibly slow to pick this up. So, for example, you know, in the wake of all this Nick Clegg stuff, people were tweeting. Do you remember this? This is the... Does anyone remember this? This was the Icelandic volcano in which all that ash was spewing out all over and prevented, you know, air travel in Europe for weeks on end in various places. And of course, Nick Clegg was seen 2 weeks ago poking it with a stick. This sort of stuff came out. And the point about this was that is that the press is now operating in a world where you cannot be completely and wholly blindly partisan. Every single reader of your paper has alternative sources of information and is using them all the time. They've all got smartphones, they've all got iPads. My aged uncle of 86 is addicted to his iPad. You know, it's not a young person's phenomenon. Everybody is using these things and everybody is gaining in this information. In modern media, you cannot cut it by making this, by being what newspapers are now. I've just written an article which, if anybody wants to get in touch with me and read it, called "A Forum for Fruitcakes and Fascists: The Essential Future for the British Mainstream Media." Because if they don't start including the Greens, if they don't start including the BNP, if they don't start including radical Islamic groups and letting those voices be heard, they're dead in the new media world. People want to, the widest range of opinion possible, whether they agree with it or not. And it also aids democracy, believe it or not, no matter how reprehensible we may find those views. Anyway, carry on quickly. Where are we? Oh yeah. So, these are some of the spoofs that I like very much. Vote Conservatives, or I'll kill this kitten. No actual kittens have been harmed yet, you know. And we've never voted Tory before, but we like their plans to cut inheritance tax from multi-millionaires. Spoofing! And these online spoofs are going to get you... There was it was alleged that 2008 that Obama was the first internet election. It wasn't. We haven't had an internet election yet. We haven't had one in which the internet is going to play the major driving role. Television, 2010 was the first time that television played a really key role. Because, of course, television's been constrained for generations by the notions of impartiality and so on. And those are disappearing. They have to in a modern media world. Because nobody wants to watch television which says this, and on the other hand this, and on the other hand this. All the rules that Ofcom have on impartiality will be gone in 10 years, for better or maybe for worse, who knows. That's the nature of the modern media world. And it's going to happen. And of course, along with all this, sorry, I'll run through that, but I mean, basically, you've got to be open. Along with all this, what we saw is another development in Americanization. We saw for the first time again, I'm not saying women or partners haven't played a role before, mostly women, of course. We genuinely saw First Lady politics, even though at least two of them were not very willing to play that role. It is the future. It is the future of British politics, because it's about personality. It's the future of modern politics. No matter how much we may, as radical, maybe I hope we're all rational beings who want to talk about policies and all that. I'm afraid, you know, that's not what the vast majority of the people want to talk about. They're more interested in Kim Kardashian's bum than they are in, you know, what she thinks about the national debt or whatever. And they're more interested in the family and the personalities of politicians than they are necessarily about policies. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, by the way. The personality of a politician can tell you a lot about their message. But I mean, we had this sort of, I mean, look at, I mean, Samantha Karen was a dream, conservative dream. You know, I'll putting it crudely, a bit of posh totty. Here we are. She was presented. This is Jan Moore, who's one of the most repulsive modern journalists going. She's the one who says Stephen Getley, a boy's own, you know, deserved to die because he was gay, effectively, more or less. Sam Camp's got a new election role as a latter-day Princess Diana. There she is. This is the image that was being presented. Personality, personality, personality. And the problem is, of course, is that we don't really trust the right-wing press anymore in the way that we did. Okay, I'm going to conclude now, very quickly. Sorry, I've gone on, I think we're nearly 25 minutes now. This is the future. There's going to be more online campaigning, obviously. Facebook and Twitter, they're already there. If you're a modern politician, if you don't have a Twitter feed, God help you. You will run the risk of being left way behind any debate. I'm not saying whether these things are good or bad, by the way, they're just happening. Paradoxically with that, of course, there is a return to a more sort of personal sort of politics. You may have already noticed that politicians are back knocking on doors in a way that they weren't before. We saw, I don't know if anybody saw the Liberal Democrat Party political ad. It emphasised, we are going to be knocking on your door and speaking to you. This is a return to the, this is the latest attempt. It's all sales pitch, by the way. This is the latest attempt to say, we're real, we're with you, we're pounding the pavements for you, etc. Because politics have become so distant. I can't remember until this election the last time a politician knocked on my door. And last week the Conservative candidate for Stoke-on-Trent North knocked on my door. Very pleasant chap as well. Whatever his politics. Knocked on my door and prepared to engage me. That's the first time that I can remember in the 20-odd years I've lived in Stoke-on-Trent. Never happened before. So maybe that's another thing about the future. And of course, one of the things that's going to happen, you may think we have professional political communicators already. I've already named it now. Labour have just bought one effectively. Oh, what's it called? Does anybody know? American. God, it'll come back to me in a minute. But anyway, that's going to happen. In other words, people who come in and who operate campaigns as professional political communicators and not as half-assed PR people like Alistair Campbell or whatever, or Peter Mandelson. People who really are steeped in selling the message. By the way, if you've never read the book by Joe McGuinness about the 1968 election campaign in America, and you're interested in politics, read it. It is a fascinating read, because again, it's the start of that process. Anyway, partisan TV channels. Do we want Fox TV over here? We're going to get it. It's happening. It's going to happen. Whether we like it or not, it is going to happen. And if the Conservatives get in, God knows what will happen to the BBC's charter renewal next year, 2016. And God knows what happens to public service television. By the way, I don't just mean the Conservatives. Any political party is going to have to make some tough decisions about public service television. It can't be carried on delivered in the way that it is now in a global media market. It just won't operate in the same way. Okay, so I've got loads of things that I could say, but I'll stop now. What there is going to be, as I say, is an increasing Americanization, and with declining newspaper sales. I don't know if you know this. For example, the Sentinel 10 years ago sold, whatever, 99,000 copies. It's selling 35,000 copies a day now. The News of the World in 1954 sold 8.5 million copies. Sun on Sunday, its replacement, sells about 2 million every week. Newspaper sales are declining, they are disappearing. We are going to find other ways of getting information, and they're nearly all going to be electronic. And again, I think that these rules about impartiality in broadcasting will go. And despite the fact that I'm dreading it in some ways, other ways I want that wider diversity of opinion than we have now. And I'll shut up there. And I think if 2010 is going to be, 2015 is going to be anything, it's the most exciting election of my lifetime. Because one of the things that I've done for 20, 30 years is psephology. I'm an opinion poster with party politics, amongst other things. It's not my main occupation, but I do it. I have no idea. I usually got some idea. I have no idea what's going to happen in May. No idea. Because UKIP thrown everything up in the air. I wouldn't like to say who's going to win. But it's going to be exciting anyway. That's it. Okay. I think, are we having a break? Are we having questions, or I'll leave it up to you.
If anybody wants to get themselves another drink, you're welcome, just while we reset and get settled. Will only be a couple of minutes.
Does anybody want to say, slag off anything I've been saying? Or?
I sort of agree with what you said about newspapers, but I think that's slightly not true, because so for example, you said the Sun's not as powerful, but Rupert Murdoch obviously behind it, as an influence is still just as important, if not.
No, Murdoch's influence is nearly gone now, because the shareholders will kick him out soon, and there's no guarantee that there's no guarantee that Murdoch's going to say
and online as well still have a lot of influence, and you can't really write it off, can you?
Yeah, no, I don't. What I'm writing off is traditional print newspapers.
But you say that because you said the core demographic is 35 to 55. They're people a lot of the time still read papers and aren't perhaps as IT literate as other areas. So that there's still, you get a lot of, without stereotyping, a lot of, you know, Middle England housewives will read the Daily Mail every single morning.
Fewer and fewer of them every week, though. That's the big thing. What they will do, though, and this is where you're dead right, is that I'm sure you know, the biggest news site in the world is the Daily Mail Online. And that's where its power is going to come.
We use the word news.
Well, you do go on it sometimes and you think you might have stepped onto Hello magazine by mistake, but there is news in it. And the reason why it's the most powerful and the most successful online is because of that emphasis on celebrity news, that, you know.
It's sci-fi, isn't it, with all the pseudo-porn and that.
I'm not sure I call it pseudo-porn, but...
I don't really think I'm being touched on it, but I think you misrepresent that 35 to 50 age group. We're actually more technically savvy than you.
I'm 40, so I'm fitting within that demographic.
We're more technically savvy because we come to a generation who's from the infancy.
Yeah.
Where we fall down, we really aren't interested in smart media.
Yeah.
And if you
Not
take
interested in what?
Smart media.
smartphones and this,
Oh,
I'm
right,
interested in it. And if you take my experience, I've stopped reading the Guardian online because I'm sick of opinion. I want news.
No,
And that's, for me, that's what it's about. I want news, not opinion. Some middle-class child who's barely out of school telling me how the world works. So it's the other way around.
Yeah, I'm talking more about the Daily Mail demographics. I think probably it's quite a static force that will last at least another 20, 30 years.
What I found, I don't know if Mick has
go.
got anything to comment on this, that partly because of shortage of time, the last 2 or 3 years I've been taking and virtually only reading The Week. You know what that is, obviously, from your nod, right? Which is a synopsis of very good articles from across the press, including some from abroad. But I also find that I've gravitated more and more to reading readers' letters in papers because, and I think this is where I think I might meet you here, I find them more informative often than many of the articles. There's a lot of people out there who know things.
What you've got to remember is that readers' letters are highly selective. They are selected by the editorial team to reflect a particular point of view. And on the day after a decision to, say, go to war in Iraq or whatever, or to cut the Navy or whatever, the Telegraph's letters page will be filled with letters that are 99.9% in favour of whatever it is the Telegraph is in favour of. That does not necessarily reflect the paper's demographic. It might do, but it doesn't necessarily. You will very rarely get a dissenting voice.
Do you know what I mean by, you know that we presume?
I do, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a
Because that, you know,
maybe the future
obviously what you're saying there is absolutely spot on. But when you've got a series of letters from the Independent, the Telegraph, the Financial Times, the New York Times, you know, specially selected, and you know, I mean, you probably remember a kind of golden era of the Sunday Times in the 1970s.
The inside team.
Yeah. When in the 1970s, before Murdoch got over it had a range of views in it. Because once Murdoch got over it and Andrew Neil became the editor, it went down the plug up, right? And went, but for a time when the Thompsons owned the Times newspapers, that family behaved very differently, according to some anyway, didn't they, as regards objectivity.
But you remember, if you remember, the reason why the Thompsons sold the Times newspapers was because of union action. The unions, the print unions, shut the Times. Sorry, I'm saying this to unison here. Shut the Times newspapers for 10 months. The Times could not operate because of the trade unions, and that's why Roy Thompson sold the papers to Murdoch. Murdoch shouldn't have been allowed to buy the papers because of the monopoly rules in place at the time. And of course, Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister, and Murdoch was pro-Thatcherite. It's a very complex picture. You might say the Sun. I mean, I would argue. Some people have argued that the Sunday Times was better under Neil than it was under Harold Evans, who was the editor. It had a very narrow ideological viewpoint before. It wasn't. I think you're looking back. I'd advise anybody who looks back at the past with rose-colored glasses to go back and actually look at the past. The Daily Mirror of the 1950s and 60s is regarded as one of the great newspapers of all time. The Daily Mirror of the 50s and 60s, a great Labour working class paper. Go back and look at it. It's dreadful. It's badly written. It's boring. It's full of ideologically rigid views on the world. I'm not saying it didn't run great features on child poverty or whatever.
Yeah, I'm not going to defend the Daily Mirror, but I mean, I do remember. I mean, we're getting lost in the 1970s.
That's all right. I mean, there's a few here who can make it.
There was greater what we call pluralism because you had Nigel Lawson writing articles in the Sunday Times, as you say, the Insight team being very radical. But anyway, we better shut up. All I will say is that we live in the 21st century. We have a far more pluralistic view out there, a far more pluralistic world in terms of the range of opinion that we have. Yeah.
We did not have that range of opinion in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. We were an incredibly conservative country, and the consensus, of course, in the 1950s and the 60s was a corporatist consensus. Yeah. That consensus is blown up at the end of the 70s. At the end of the 60s and the beginning of the 70s, and what emerges is now a new consensus, where whether you like it or not, we're all Thatcherites now. And I know that's a difficult thing to say, but we all have accepted a view of the world that 30 years ago would have been anathema to Labour supporters.
Well, you've got to interview somebody shortly who doesn't accept that, and whose party doesn't accept that view of the world.
Well, that's all right, because I'm hoping that you're going to tell this audience more about the Green Party than I know, anyway. Did anybody have any ideas about the election? I mean, you know, would you like to sort of, would anybody like to predict what's going to happen? Maybe in Stafford, are the Conservatives going to hold on to Stafford? Yeah.
Even the Labour candidate saying it's on a knife edge.
Oh, in Stafford?
Yeah.
Oh no, he's saying that because it's probably not an eye face, to be honest. They're probably not going to win it,
Wow.
to be blunt. If you look, but again, you don't know what happened. You don't know what UKIP are going to do to the Conservative vote, do you? You have no idea. And then you've got the hospital candidate as well. And look what happened with Richard Taylor in Kidderminster. You know, he got elected twice on that ticket. Yeah, I mean, it's still, for obvious reasons.
Hasn't Jeremy pretended he's interested in the hospital?
Well, that's a bit cynical, isn't it? You know, I'm sure he is interested in the hospital. He'd have to be, wouldn't he? To be, how could you not?
All I've ever seen is sound bites. I haven't seen anything.
I mean, he's in a particularly interesting position, I think, because he did organise monthly meetings as regards saving the facilities at Stafford Hospital, right? But, you know, you think, well, you are a member of a government who is doing this top-down reorganisation, costing £4 billion, which is sucking money out of other areas of the hospital. Now, so he spoke up, but you know, what do you say about somebody who speaks up and is, you know, part of a party who is eroding the National Health Service?
Because the other thing about the party he belongs to, the NHS has been slowly privatised for the last 15 years, and that's from his party. And I wondered if that's why I've only ever seen sound bites.
Yeah, no, don't forget, the last 15 years the Blairite agenda consisted of the market reforms throughout the 90s. That reform of local government, the reform of the way in which services were produced, those arm's length agencies that Thatcher had introduced, was continued by Labour. In fact, there's a very famous Daily Telegraph article, in fact, from 1996, which Tony Blair wrote, and it was called "How I Will Follow Her." It's like, you know, almost religious fervour attached there. So, I mean, arguably, the supposed champion of the NHS, the Labour Party, has been one of its biggest enemies because it's failed to.
He's not the Labour Party. He's New Labour.
Well, he's not. Well, no, I mean, you know, we can. We talk about the rebranding. By the way, the point that I meant to make at the end, which I completely forgot, because I added this picture to the PowerPoint and then sent you the
old
first
one.
Was the last picture. If we're talking about personality politics, the last picture I was going to leave you with was of Ed Miliband. Now, the sad thing is that Miliband's obviously a decent human being. He's not an idiot. He's got some good ideas. He is committed, of course, as Blair was, to the economic policies of a previous Conservative government. So what's he going to do about the NHS? Maybe nothing. But the thing is, if we are in an era of personality politics, and I think we are, what chance has Miliband got of becoming Prime Minister? Because nobody, really, seriously, apart from die-hard Labour supporters, sees him as a potential Prime Minister. Just because of the way he looks, talks and acts. And that's a sad indictment, isn't it? 21st century politics.
Policies or differentiation in any other way, does it?
Well, there may be that as well, but
But is Cameron media friendly?
yeah, I think so. Cameron looks like a prime minister, whether you like him or not. He carries himself in a way that sort of is prime ministerial, whether you like his policies or not, as Thatcher did, you know, and as Gordon Brown did, certainly in the first 6 months of his prime ministership. I don't think you've got to look the part. You're not going to get the lead role in a Hollywood movie unless you're George Clooney or, you know, Bradley Cooper or whatever. We're not going to get it. That's the nature of the world now. There's a superficiality about it.
I think that's true.
Well, you might. Sorry, yeah. You better look at him, I am.
I think that's true, but if you have some integrity in your beliefs, I think that carries you quite far. And that's probably the problem people like Miliband has.
Yeah.
Sort of there's no conviction really in what they say, is there?
No.
I know partly it's about how you express that through your personality.
I think you can get away with it.
Yeah, exactly. It's just wishy-washy. Cameron's horrible, but at least you know.
You probably know that I spent 35 years in the Labour Party, right?
You remember it
We remember well, we were colleagues, people on top. We tried to save it at one point, didn't we, Pete? And one of the things which fascinates me, being inside the Labour Party, and I left because, you know, I couldn't stand it being on the centre right or whatever anymore, and social inequality increasing on the New Labour, da-da. But one of the fascinating things, if you know, up until 2007 when I left, I was grumbling all the time about what was going on. You know, I was in the council chamber and I'd think, if I wanted to be a Conservative, I would be over there with them, you know. But, you know, as I've thought more objectively about it, one of the things which has crossed my mind is I know there's some very good people in the Labour Party. There's some very good people on the benches, right? Joan Wally was one that's come off Stoke North. You've met, yeah. And our friend that we admire, Austin Mitchell, over in Grimsby. Tremendous bloke, got a lot of character, says the wrong things occasionally, but is a very interesting, stimulating, thoughtful man. He tried to defend council housing, for example. The Labour Party is afraid of voting in anybody with character or strong beliefs, it seems to me. So I'm criticise the Labour Party unduly, but it's a fascinating thing about why the Labour Party has gone downhill. And we've got trade unionists now coming to the Green Party, like the RMT people, Rail and Maritime Transport, who will say that the Labour, things that I decided 10 years ago, that the Labour Party is irredeemable in terms of what's gone on. It will never again function strongly for the people. Because you have these worries. I can see it in your face, right? You can see what's been happening, and we kind of wonder if Labour gets into government, either as the League Party or the coalition, to what extent they will act in the interests of ordinary people as opposed to acting in the interests of the wealthy. But people like me decided I had to, I was sitting on the council benches in the council chamber for 10 years virtually, thinking, cool, where am I going to go after this? Because I decided to stay on the council whilst I could do something, for people in Stafford, right, and stay in the party. But and it wasn't Iraq that did it for me. It was a load of things, right? When I first started thinking about it, I never considered the Green Party. I had a kind of image of people who were kind of over-idealistic, etc., not impractical. But when I left the council in 2007, I fairly immediately resigned from the Labour Party. I thought I'd have a year off from party politics, and I actually went to the Liberal conference, Liberal Democrat conference in Brighton to see what they were up to, because I was quite impressed with Charles Kennedy, actually, right? Yeah? And I always said, better Charles Kennedy inebriated than Tony Blair sober, right? And anyway, I went to the, I sort of went, I think, well, which is, I always say, Labour, say the 1970s, 1980s, Labour's the best of a bad bunch. Now, where am I going to next in terms of the best of the bad bunch in the noughties, right? So I went to Brighton, observed the Liberals in their working groups, because I couldn't get into the conference. It was about 300 quid to get into the conference at Brighton. Then I went to Liverpool and observed the Green Party conference, right? Thinking, well, this won't be much over. I went into sessions, and for this is going to move me near to tears. This is because when I went into the conference, it was like going back to the days when you had people with strong beliefs, like in the Independent Labour Party, you know, in the first half of the 20th century, before you and I were born, right? There were people actually emphasising social equality and democracy, as well as sustainability, the environmental agenda. And I went through the Labour Party for years, never hearing the word capitalism, right? The last person I heard talk about capitalism was a chap, was a councillor called Norman Crockett, and he and Margaret Jordan, right, in the south of the town, had a good idea about capitalist exploitation. But, you know, as the Labour Party went on, you could see that people had virtually no idea about the power of the wealthy. Sorry, Mark.
No, I'm going to interrupt you there because I don't know whether we're going to have a break now or whether we're
No, just carry on.
going to carry on. Because, okay, I understand that this is your disenchantment with the Labour Party, and I think many people share that disenchantment. The same sort of people I know, many Liberal Democrats who over the last 5 years have left the party for maybe similar reasons. I've got some questions there, but I'm going to ask you the first question because I can remember what that is.
Yeah.
We know now why you the first question of the British politics is full of people who jump around. Well, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the death of one of them,
Yeah.
Churchill, who jumped from party to party as it suited him. But I'm going to ask you what for me is the key question, and I think maybe people here will want to know. Why vote Green when you have no chance whatsoever of winning a single parliamentary seat or forming the next government?
Right. Two perspectives on that. One, if you assess the problems that we and future generations are up against, one is the question of social injustice because of basically the overwhelming power of capitalism, including being able to capture the Labour Party, so that you've got all kinds of deprivation and difficulties caused to ordinary people. As we know, one of the biggest ones is housing. You know, some of the more graphic ones are things like the ATOS system, where people who are very ill are forced to go back to work, the cruelty of the bedroom tax, etc. Now, in no way do I believe that the Labour Party would be as bad as the Conservatives. But if you see how slow the Labour Party was in terms of saying the bedroom tax was wrong, it took about a year to make their mind up that there was things wrong with the bedroom tax. You need a party that is strongly for social justice, that will act in the interests of the general population. That was, that was Lloyd George and co. before the First World War, with that radical liberal government. We know it was the Labour Party in the late 40s under Attlee and co. I'm going to come to the nub of your question, right? But
I'm going to push you in a minute.
Yeah. And you also need a party which won't destroy the Earth's habitability, right? That means business about that. Now, you say, why? I'm nearly 70, right? Why the investment I can make in a better future for people is the Green Party. It's not only the worst of a bad bunch. It's actually, I'm more enthusiastic at 69 about the Green Party doing people well.
All that explains your commitment to it and your belief that you've got a cause, etc. I mean, but essentially, you're Don Quixote tilting at windmills, aren't you? You've got to convince this audience, this massive audience here, why should they vote Green? Nothing that you said, because the only point that I could give you an answer if you like, if you're not going to give me the answer. Why vote Green?
Because on the one hand, Now, and this takes maturity, which I'm sure you've got as well as me,
That's what I
right?
think so.
Right? You look at what it takes time. It took time for the Labour Party to build up during the 20th century, right, before it could deliver good stuff, right, in the late 1940s. Now, I hope it's going to be a damn sight sooner with a kind of green influence. If you look, I mean, there's been a lot of propaganda against our only council, which we don't control, but we've got the biggest number of councillors down in Brighton. They've reversed this situation of not building public housing down there. They've only been in power for about three and a quarter years, but they've managed to get built 600 council houses and social housing units. Right now, if people can see and things are on the move. I don't know how fast they will move, but obviously, you know, those of you who are interested and you're here tonight because you're interested, you'll know that there's been a vast increase in membership in terms of the Green Party. You know, you're representing, some of you, the disillusion with the existing parties. So that there's a momentum building up, as there was. You know, with the Scottish referendum, right, where well, instead of people feeling helpless about politics, the Scots, right, 85% of them, huge number, turned out to vote in the referendum, and they turned out because politics became relevant to them, and hope was restored.
Okay, all this is. No, excuse me. I'm going to be Jeremy Paxton.
All right.
All this is really fine rhetoric. You haven't said. I mean, I can claim all sorts of things. I can found a party which has all these wonderful ideals and wants to sort of change the world and sort of build a better world and end Ebola, etc. You know, sort of end world poverty. How are you going to do it when? At the last general election, 1% of the population voted for you. At the last European elections, only 5% of the population voted, or the British population voted for the Green Party. And there is no indication that you are ever going to be in a position, perhaps in a few places like Brighton, which is a sort of pretty radical place anyway, you're ever going to be in a position to introduce, and councils, of course, as you know, have very limited powers anyway, are you ever going to be in a position to deliver some of the things that you've talked about, you know, in your manifesto? You haven't produced the manifesto yet, but in your previous manifestos.
Well, if you think that things can be done overnight, right? That is ridiculous, isn't it? Right? What we're doing here is presenting, you know, a coherent alternative vision for the betterment of humankind and the betterment of their environment. Now, you know, nobody is going to start from being a toddler party, right, to being a fully fledged ruling group in government overnight.
Well,
but I mean,
you've gone backwards in the last 20 years. In 1989, the Green Party took 15% in the European elections.
Yeah.
Last time you took 5%. The truth, maybe, is that other political parties have taken some, and this may be where you do have strength, have actually taken some of your policies which have proved attractive to the electorate.
Which ones?
Well, you know, they may not have delivered them, but certainly 1989 made the Conservative Party talk more about urban planning and the green belt, etc. We all know what's happening, by the way, now. But maybe that's the only way in which you're going to have any influence. That you influence the major political parties if the ideas that you present look attractive. The problem is, of course, is that some of the ideas you're presenting now are anything but attractive to people. Dismantling immigration controls, for example, which is what Natalie Bennett talked about on the Andrew Marr show, I think it was it on Sunday? I don't know if you saw it. whether you, noble though it may be, it may have noble means, it's not going to attract an electorate which is, in general, deeply suspicious.
Well, I don't think Natalie said dismantle that. It's not our policy to dismantle immigration controls. It is our policy.
Dismantling the current system, anyway. Introducing a new system.
Well, I mean, there's certain things like the business of preventing partners from joining spouses or children from joining their parents in the country, which that strikes us as being inhumane and not called for. But not for. I mean, some people talk about an open borders policy where everybody would be allowed into countries. We're not for open borders. If you want to take the immigration thing, right, there's a number of levels to it. I think British society has had often a good record as regards people who are refugees, as what's come to be known as asylum seekers. A good chunk of people who enter European countries are entering because of wars. They are refugees. Another chunk, as we know, is because of the EU policy about free movement of labour. Now nobody is suggesting that that policy can be hit on the head. We've got 5 million. We've got yeah, but what's UKIP going to do about the 5 million? I think it's 5 million British people who are in Europe.
UKIP's not suggesting an end to freedom of movement. It's suggesting an end to certain parts of the new countries of the European Union, certain of the newer countries, and also in terms of dependencies and so on, and also restrictions on movement without a job at the end of it, or sort of Australian model, if you like, within the European borders. I know that's difficult. You might not like it, but it certainly can't contradict. And most of the major political parties now are looking in some way to restrict the movement of people, even within the EU borders.
One of the things which would help greatly, and people, most of you probably sufficiently connected with the society that we live in, whether it's Stoke North or wherever, is that there are families in this country who haven't worked for two and a half generations. Plenty in what we still call the potteries, places like Telford. There are even sort of areas and families in Stafford who haven't worked. Now, why haven't they worked? Because work and training, the training for work has not been offered them, right? Not been provided. There's been a cut down, and hence we have people doing jobs that come, because of labour shortages from places like Eastern Europe. Now, if governments could do anything constructive at all, right, about this free movement of labour, it would be to ensure more widespread training, particularly in the kind of communities that I've referred to. Because then those people would be doing the jobs, right? Capable of doing the jobs, and there would be less need to recruit people for things like the building industry and the NHS.
We might come on to you in a minute to talk about how you're going to finance most of these ideas, but do you want to?
That's a burning question.
Yeah.
I agree about people not being skilled, the 2.5 generations who haven't worked are not skilled. And I agree that a lot of people are out of work. And I'm one of those people that lurches from job to job. And I'm very fortunate that I'm educated enough to be able to do that. Can you explain to me, if it's the fault of the Europeans that these people can't work, why did our government actively advertise for Polish workers in Poland in the Polish language? And that's something that makes me mad. The Poles are coming over taking our jobs because our government advertised in their local newspapers, and when they got here they were shocked at their reception.
Yeah, I didn't know about the advertising bit, but it's what is, you know, one of my dental practice that I go to, right, one of the chaps that's the dentist is a Stafford bloke, actually, right? His partner comes from Poland. In the 1980s, the Conservative government closed down a number of dental schools, right? Now, it's a kind of upper middle class kind of example of, you know, messing about with the training, because all this emphasis on tax cuts, right? How did they manage to do the tax cuts in the 1980s and recently, and perhaps what Cameron is talking about now, you know, saying we're going to have tax cuts. A large part of those tax cuts were cuts in public services, including training.
Has anybody else got any points they want to make, or questions here? Before I go on to ask you about maybe something that is a major problem for many parties who are in government. There's a big problem for the Labour Party at the moment, which is your party is committed to public management of services. Services currently in the private sector, especially essential public services, you might see, water, for example. You're committed to a return to public housing.
Yeah.
You're committed to if you like, what some people have characterised as a policy of negative economic growth, effectively.
Yeah.
But certainly not. All of these things, and all of the things that you've talked about in terms of a better national health service, and better education, better schooling, all of these things have to be paid for. And that's not to say that that's not possible. The Scandinavian countries have seen that it is possible, but the levels of taxation in Scandinavian countries, that is not something that one can ever see the British people now accepting. So how are you going to persuade people that you know, current levels of taxation, for example, which might be between 35 and 40%, are going to have to rise to maybe nearly half of your income?
You can see I'm going through my crib sheet here,
Yeah.
right?
How are you going to? I mean, so how are you going to? One, how are you going to? There's two questions here. One, how are you going to persuade people to pay more in taxes? Because there is no magic sum here. You can't sort of produce all these services without generating more income. So how are you going to do that if you don't increase taxes? And the second point is, how are you going to persuade people to do something which is increasingly anathema in the Western world, which is a return to the big state, the big nanny state, the state that, in the words of Bevin and Cripps and even Harold Wilson, was from the cradle to the grave, which is what your policies seem to be implying.
Well, because the propaganda, including from those, what you're saying, on the turn, those newspapers, right, portraying the state as a bad thing rather than a supportive thing. That propaganda, resulting in phrases like the nanny state, has been very effective. But not, we have examples of about four countries in particular, the Scandinavian countries, where people live in a much better state of well-being, don't resent taxation for the public benefits that it gives. So there's a model there, right? However, there's a whole kind of chunk of things that we would be looking at, well, not just looking at, but doing in government. Obviously, things like wealth tax, corporation tax, which has been reduced, being increased. Environmental taxes. There's a whole range of costed proposals. One of the annoying things, but also amusing things in the 2010 general election was for me to find myself as a candidate there, and been in politics for a long period of time. We're a well thought out and costed manifesto. And we've got oodles of policies, right, it's contrast with the poverty in UK that's still trying to hire people to provide them with policies. But the Green Party has a better thought out set of policies than the Conservatives and Labour if what in 2015 is the repeat of 2010.
Okay, I'm still not sure how you're going to pay for it. How are you going to pay for all this? Where's the money going to come from? Are you going to increase taxation? Is there going to be increased taxes on business?
Yes.
In a global world where, let's face it, you can move your offices and your headquarters and very, very easily, and there are plenty of places from Holland to Switzerland to Malaysia or whatever that will take you in, and China even will take you in and not charge you those sort of taxes. How are you going to persuade international companies to invest in the UK to be based here? And how are those sort of taxes not going to drive away those businesses that we need to survive?
Well, I mean, those companies need to trade here. They need the infrastructure of roads and other things. There is certainly a huge problem. I mean, it must fox us all about why Ireland, Luxembourg, or whatever can have a lower rate of corporation tax than other places. I mean, clearly one of the big issues of the European Union, they talk about uniformity. There's no uniformity when it comes to corporation tax, right? So you've had this kind of Dutch auction situation of firms moving. The Americans actually approaching that much more kind of rigorously to ensure that companies have to pay the tax where they do the trading. So that's a big
So you would
issue.
ensure that Apple, Starbucks, Vodafone, for example, the companies.
Yeah.
Vodafone, of course, which is totally essential to the economy of North Staffordshire, will be forced to pay the same sort of taxes as any other business operating within the United Kingdom.
Yeah, where you're making
And
money.
you're prepared to take the consequences of that.
Well, if they want to make money out of the British public by providing a service, they should pay the taxes which result from that.
Anybody got any more?
I think the key to selling it is, like I say, is fighting that perception about the nano-state and stuff. And it's about that the money should come from. It's about transfer of the capital from the private sector back into the public sector, isn't it? I mean, you've got loads of good examples. Like I'm from Leeds, that's where I live.
Yeah.
I work here during the week. East Coast Main Line, making loads of money.
Yeah.
Best customer service on the National Railway. Now it's outsourced. Everyone in Leeds is absolutely outraged. There's not one person who thinks it's a good idea. You've got something like I used to work for Yorkshire Water.
Yeah.
We've creamed, that company runs, it delivers all the water from Yorkshire. It creams all its profits off. It basically borrows all its money against.
Who owns Yorkshire Water?
Japanese bank. And they borrow, the Yorkshire Water borrows all their money against future bills from that Japanese bank. So there's £350 million a year goes out of the British economy.
So how do you counter this sort of thing?
That's the argument you need to spread. And I think
that East Coast Main Line, if I remember rightly, it was franchised out to a company that they had to give it up, didn't they? Because they couldn't make it.
Yeah, it just went
right. So people have seen, it's interesting to get that feedback. They've seen the model of the public sector working, right? Where
delivering £800 million back into the coffers.
Yeah, and you see, one of the difficulties is for people to see those kind of things, not see them. I mean,
I
there's a
think
few
people see
billion.
it, I just don't think they see a political option that will actually address it, and I think that's what you need to do as a Green Party.
Yeah, well,
and that's what you are doing.
Yeah, but we're in favour of renationalising.
There's so many people out there, they know all these things, you know, they buy into the media stuff, but in their heart they actually, you know, they talk about the decline in services.
Yeah.
There is, I mean, these are very good points. There are, and a renationalisation of the railways in the UK is a potential goer. If you can present the environmental and service needs for this, and I'm surprised that the Green Party doesn't really concentrate. It's not going to. You're not going to get by. Why are you producing all these economic policies and they're never going to happen? I'm just wondering why you don't concentrate on one or two key areas which might make a real difference and sell those. You get more votes and you get more publicity, and in the long run, you might get a society that is the one thing that you want, which is more cooperative, fairer, decent, or whatever.
Well, I was only laughing, Mick, because the issue of the railways is one that's got to be very much up front.
They are promoting that.
Yeah, I mean, there was a policy announcement in January about the Green government would cut fares. At that point, when the fares were going up, would actually cut fares by 10%.
Yeah, but no, you can't. There's point in saying that is you're not going to do it. You're not going to get in and cut fares. You can say what you like. You can say we're going to give everybody, you know, free lunch and meat or whatever. Or we're going to do A, B, C or whatever. Every child is going to get a free laptop. It's not going to happen. This is the point that I would put to you. Concentrate on those things where with the green push behind it might actually make a difference.
I don't think we disagree about that.
No, I'm saying, but you're talking now about, you're saying, oh, we said we were going to do this, we were going to cut fares and all that.
Yeah,
you're never going to do it. You're not in a position to. So think about, I mean, it would seem to me, sorry, I've stepped over the role of chairman here, haven't I? Not surprised, my wife would say. You know, think about, there are a number of key policy areas where the Greens are actually pushing in the direction that the British public want them to go. For example, fracking is something that you might want to concentrate on. No, but I mean, by spreading yourself thin, by creating all these policies which nobody takes seriously, you know, you have to.
They have to do that because if they don't do that, then it's just UKIP, aren't they?
I disagree.
You know, getting told we're a kind of one-issue party, where there's
be
a kind
honest.
of big store of policy.
Be honest. Go to the British people. One of the things that we talked about there, and one of the slides which you didn't see. By the way, if anybody wants a copy of that presentation, I've got a copy of the slides here. If anybody wants one, one of the things that you've got to be is honest. You're not honest because you go out there and you say we're going to form this government and this is what we're going to do. Go there and say, we know, we're never going to form a government, you're not going to vote for us, but these are things that we think can happen, and these are the things we're fighting for, and these are the things we want to put forward to you, and stress that we want to do. And if one or two of us are elected, we will fight with other politicians who want to do those things. Do you see what I mean? There's a distinct lack of honesty in pretending that you're going to get elected.
It's kind of a bit. That's a bit. That's a bit loose. That business about it. That is. I mean, if anything, a few minutes ago I was being, unusually honest in terms of talking about the build-up of a party, right? Because you said, well, you're not going to get into government, and I explained certain things. In fact, one of the things which I think some of you obviously will have noticed, that we are trying to form looser alliances with like-minded people. So, in other words, you will have seen Natalie Bennett, the leader of the Green Party, with Nicola Sturgeon and Leanne Wood, right? The leaders of Plaid and the Scottish Nationalist Party, jointly coming out about going again, abandoning Trident, right? Billions of pounds a year. That, an easy indication of where one would get money, and also being anti-austerity. So I think that the British people, as opposed to just England, right, do have the prospect of countervailing power developing. I mean, the Green Party in Europe is in the same political grouping as Plaid and the Scottish Nationalists. Right? Now, so it's, you know, without the green surge becomes incredibly accelerating, and we start to win marginal seats like here in Stafford, right? What you outline, Mick, as regards, you know, saying you can push on the railways, you can do this, and we're doing that. The prospects for countervailing power is good.
Okay. Can I just ask you one question, which is the general one, which is, because it's a question, because it's a concept that seems to be uncontentious, and yet it's anything but. Right at the core of the Green Party stuff that I've read, the idea that your goal is, obviously, the earth is number one, but something called the common good. Now, that idea of the common good is something that many political parties have been supposed to stand for, or declared that they will stand for, from the early socialist movements to the modern Conservative Party in some ways. What do you mean by the common good?
Well, in your presentation, you know, you touched on, you know, Osborne's "we're all in this together," right? Which is a subterfuge about working for the common good, because it's very clear that the existing three big parties, the great parties in UKIP, right, are not for the common good. They are for the wealthy to varying extents.
What is the common good?
The opportunities and welfare of the bulk of the people in this country, the ordinary people. It's the 99%, as the people in the Occupy movement would say, as opposed to the 1%.
Yeah, that 99%, of course, includes hedge fund managers.
No, it doesn't. They're in the 1%.
No. You're misrepresenting the nature of this. The 1% is an extraordinarily, very, very small, rich people. The rest of the 99% have incredible salary ranges,
yeah,
incredible differences in what they want from society. For some of them, you're talking about the common good as if it's an uncontentious idea, as if we can all agree what the common good is. And the whole point is why we have politics and party politics as fractured as it is in modern times, is because that common good does not exist anymore as a universal concept.
Yeah, I mean,
except theoretically.
Well, you know, the loss of community and collective action is to be regretted. But the idea about the 1%, I mean, we all know it exists. The business of properties in London, you know, to live in various properties in London, you know, it's costing £4 million. Part of that is this 1% phenomena, and it's a 1% phenomena which has been, I mean, we talk about immigration. One of the biggest problems with immigration is rich Russian oligarchs and other people who are very wealthy taking over the property of London, either in many cases, in some cases to live in, right? You know, and in other cases to just buy up property and then convert it to expensive rentals. And we've seen people pushed out of the centre of London. That process of people being dispossessed is spreading slowly to the rest of the country to make our housing problems even worse. Of course, there always has been you know, the question of getting people to see that their interests, like the National Health, people do see in the case of the National Health Service. The 99% do see that the National Health Service is there for their common good, right? But there's always been the situation whereby people will unfortunately, if they aren't aware of their common good, and many people, you know, will just say, well, that, you know, the person round the corner has got a cushy job compared with me. You know, the postman may be who sees the painter and decorator or the electrician, right? You know, those narrow comparisons, right? But they've all got a stake in having decent education, decent NHS, decent environmental health services.
I think probably that was a very brave of you to allow me to slag off most of the things that you believe in. I think that was a very well put final answer. Thank you, Mike. I might disagree with you. I do. As a libertarian, you know, the idea of from the cradle to the grave is something that fills me with horror. The idea of the common good is something that fills me with horror. And I don't think I'm alone in society. I may be making this up now, just to wind you up. But there are many people out there who don't share. There's not even 99% who want the NHS to continue as a common service, and that's one of the least contentious things. There is, I think, the concept of a common good, beautifully expressed that he puts it, is something that may only exist in some sort of environment, but that's another issue. Does anybody want to make any final points?
I mean, could I come back to the first question, which is really about why
vote green?
Why vote green, in a sort of, in a kind of tactical sense, because of the zero chance of the Greens forming government, and so, you know, even winning in Stafford. And I think you also stated that we've got no chance of getting any MPs elected anywhere, which I don't
that may
agree
not be
with.
quite true. I mean, there are areas like Brighton, for example, where you know, and I mean, of course, you know, you have an MP, so I mean, it's maybe sort of slightly overstated the case.
Few student areas in the large cities that quite.
Yeah, you just got to get students to vote because they're the least. They're one of the young people who are the least
Student
likely
areas
to
in
vote.
Leeds, Sheffield have always been, well, traditionally been Labour, Liverpool and the last few years.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see whether Clegg's going to hold on to Hallam, isn't
I
it?
don't think he could lose it.
The change in electoral signing up of registration laws may well see a decline in student voting in those areas, but I do agree some areas are going to be crucial for student voting.
Headingley, where I grew up, was a really big student in Leeds, and that's a really big student area. That's very
Yeah, I think you have a point here. I think if there's one thing that the Greens have got, is they have some sort of morality on their side, which the other political parties struggle to get. And young people are attracted to you know, great ideas and ethical ideas. The Green Party, whether I agree with it or not, whether anybody agrees with it, certainly ethics is right at the centre of what we believe, in a way that perhaps lip service is paid to it by other political parties, but you know, and I think that that's where you should be directing your energies, in those areas with young people, because if you can motivate them, then you know, maybe the future really is yours.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, the opinion polls.
Sorry, did I interrupt what you were saying?
Yeah, I mean, what I was going to go on to say was that you know, obviously the Green Party offers a, you know, clear alternative to the austerity programmes of the other parties, and, but I think for the last, you know, 15 years, the last 3 general elections and so many local elections, a lot of people haven't really felt comfortable with New Labour, but they've sort of gone and voted for them, kind of holding their nose in that phrase to keep the Tories out. And people, I think people are fed up with that and have been disappointed by the Labour government, Blair and Brown years. And, you know, obviously, you know, there's a surge in green membership, you know, up by, I think about 66% in the last 12 months to a figure of 50,000. And that's putting pressure on Labour from the left. I think that Labour is starting to move because for so long it's been able to take, you know, the votes of those disaffected people for granted. Now this actually might go and put their cross in the green box on election day. There are commentators, you know, on the, you know, Labour members who are saying, you know, we should argue for renationalisation of the railways, living wage, and that sort of thing. I think that's, you know, that's why it's important to vote green and to vote for, if that's how you feel, if you agree with, you know, what you hear, to vote for the Greens, because the only way you'll get the government you want is really to vote for it.
No, I hidden away in there, and maybe not what you mean, is that I agree that the only way for green policies to be taken seriously has happened, arguably, we can talk about it after 1989, when so many people, disaffected people, voted green in the Euro elections that year, is for more people to vote green, because that will influence certain people on the left in particular. And maybe that's your biggest and best way of influencing anything, of being that influence within the Labour Party, because you'll never be that influence within the Conservative Party for all sorts of reasons. So maybe that's your future. But realistically, that's the only way that you're going to influence the electoral agenda anyway, and the policy agenda. That's my opinion anyway. And you may not like it, but sadly, the evidence does not support your belief that the British people are gagging to vote green, because they're not.
You can't expect a switch from 0 to, well,
No.
one seat to
No.
sweeping majority.
No, the key point is what we've seen is a decline in green voting. That's the reality.
That's
We may have seen a slight increase in membership lately. I'd like to know how many members were in the Environment Party, you know, maybe 20 years ago, and compare it to now. You know, this
that peak that you talk about in '89, which, as you indicate too, coincided with total anathema with the Tories and total anathema with Labour, right?
Yeah, the poll tax was the height then, and that was one of the major factors.
Yeah. But now there's not only a green surge in membership. I mean, you've been watching the opinion polls, right?
Yeah. The last week.
Well, for the last five weeks. First of all, the Green Party was in contention with the Liberals as regards, what is it, 4th, 5th place, right? There's been a number of opinion polls which have put the Green Party somewhat ahead of the Liberals. You've got a very dynamic situation. You were talking about the transformation of the media earlier, about how, you know, it's fragmented. You've got a fragmenting situation as regards politics, as you well know. You know, it's far from, you know, the 1950s two-party system. What, you know, it would be, you know, not nice that dynamic which is happening, and that disillusion which kind of been mentioned, you know, gravitated, you know, to a situation where the Green Party is very, very powerful. You said at the very beginning, the situation is unpredictable. I mean, I was just dumbfounded. I don't like the word gobsmacked. I was dumbfounded for a while when seeing, you know, in January 2014, the Green Party had 12,000 members. And it started to snowball.
Why do you think that membership has increased? I mean, you obviously have some ideas as to why. I mean, is it is it suddenly disenchantment with Labour? Is it a sort of recoil from UKIP, or what?
I think there are lots of factors. I think you've mentioned two of them. I think that certainly people are, see the rise of UKIP and are kind of frightened by it to spring into action. I dare say because I'm Taylor Line, a member of the Green Party, I dare say we've seen quite a few people who joined us from the Democrats, after feeling betrayed by their leadership, during the coalition. But it seems like I think there may be another reason that the rise of UKIP has helped the Green Party, because it's sort of blowing the two-party or three-party system out of the water. People see that, and I think that we're finally getting our message across. We're not just written off as a single issue environmental party. Getting the message out about our social justice policies and values as well. People are, I think, inspired by the fact that we have women and we've got a female MP and a female leader now. Things like that may be appealing as well.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting that people are more sensitive that we're more in tune with the times.
I think it's a sign of society as well. I mean, people are, the worn out. It's not just the chaps and the poor, the really poor that are starting to feel the effects. It's the middle classes and all that, and people see that and they realise that all the illusion of whatever's not quite what it's portrayed to be, is it? So people look for a credible alternative. I think that's part of the appeal of it.
It would be nice to think that the realities of power are being demonstrated to the people, but remain to be convinced.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not suggesting for a minute, we'll win lots of seats, or I'm sure we'll continue to do well if we, get our deposits back. But I think, it's hopefully, this
It's
is a
sustainable
stepping
growth,
stone.
isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And as Mike says, the Labour Party had to start off small, in the early part of the 20th century, and it wasn't that. I know there are differences, of course, but obviously it wasn't that long before they were.
Yeah, the power of the trade union bloc vote and the power of the trade unions that drove the success. I mean, but even then it took 1900 the Labour Party was formed. Arguably, there's a dispute about the exact date. It took 45 years for a workable government workable Labour government to be brought in, and that, if you like, with the power of Labour behind it, and the massive potential power that Labour, the mass of the Labour movement gave that political party. There isn't that momentum behind you in that way. You've got to win a battle of ideas, and you're out there in an environment now in which, unlike the Labour Party, it wasn't a relatively simple battle between capital and Labour. You're out there where the ideologies are raining down on us from all directions. You're just one of those ideologies. You may be the most beautiful, and I share your belief that the earth is #1 in all our priorities, because without it we're... And I don't think that you'll win it. Seriously, I wasn't being funny, I wasn't trying to dismiss it by pretending that you can do things that you're never going to be in a position to do.
I don't think the example, Tom, that the Greens should be looking at is comparing themselves with the history of the Labour Party.
No.
If I was Green, I would be looking at the example of the Scottish National Party, who 30 years ago were a fringe, slightly loopy party, but they now have got a huge membership, and what isn't happening with the Greens, that isn't translated into votes. What the SNP has done has got a massive membership, and that's translated into votes. Tactically, Mike, you're quite right. You need to be shouting about how we could be like Denmark. The SNP for years have made an analogy to Scotland and Norway, and that's been really effective. Also, you talk about being with part with other groups. If you think of the role that the Green MSP Patrick Harvey played in the referendum, by being with Nicola Sturgeon, with the SNP and that shower, it did enable him to look good, to share in power, to share in success, and to raise the profile in a way that will benefit the Greens in Scotland, I think. So that's two tactical points. I think you're absolutely right on.
Thanks, Mick.